"Rachel is pregnant," my husband said with a trembling voice, and the Rachel he was talking about was his secretary of 3 years. His next words cut even deeper. "Her family owns that marketing firm you've always dreamed of working for. Her father promised me a senior position if I choose her. You know how desperately I've wanted to escape the corporate ladder." I sat there, frozen, as 15 years of marriage crumbled before my eyes. What James didn't know was that I had just received a job offer from Vertex Media, one of the largest digital marketing agencies in the country, the very competitor that was slowly crushing Rachel's family business. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain pounded against our bedroom window as I struggled to process what I was hearing. James and I had been together since graduate school, 15 years of building a life, of supporting each other's dreams, of planning a future that now lay shattered at my feet. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my husband's face, and wondered how long he had been practicing this speech. His eyes wouldn't meet mine as he continued to list all the reasons why destroying our marriage was somehow the rational choice. "It just happened, Catherine," he said, his voice a strange mixture of guilt and justification. "I didn't plan for this, but now with the baby, I have to do the right thing." The right thing. As if abandoning his wife for his pregnant secretary was some noble sacrifice. I felt something cold and hard form in the center of my chest, spreading outward until my entire body was numb. This was the man who had promised to love me forever, who had held my hand through my father's funeral just 6 months ago, who had talked about growing old together on that porch swing we'd picked out last summer. Our story had begun so differently. We met in our MBA program, 2 ambitious students with dreams bigger than our bank accounts. James was charming, brilliant, and driven. I was focused, creative, and determined. Together, we were unstoppable, or so I thought. After graduation, we built our careers in tandem, celebrating each other's promotions and consoling each other through setbacks. When James landed a job as marketing director at Pearson & Wells 3 years ago, I had been thrilled for him. "This is your moment," I had said, champagne glass raised in a toast. "I'm so proud of you." If only I had known that his new secretary would become the catalyst for our destruction. A week after James's revelation, I sat alone in our, now my, kitchen, surrounded by divorce papers and half-packed boxes. James had moved out immediately, taking only what he claimed were his essentials. I'd laughed bitterly at that, as if our 15 years together could be so easily sorted into his and mine. The house was eerily quiet without his presence, without the sound of his keys dropping onto the counter, or his humming as he cooked. "Dinner?" I kept expecting to hear his footsteps down the hallway, to feel his hands on my shoulders as he kissed the top of my head, a gesture so familiar it had become like breathing. Now, every breath felt like a conscious effort. I picked up my phone and stared at the email that had arrived just hours before James's confession. "We are pleased to offer you the position of Senior Marketing Strategist at Vertex Media." The timing was almost cruelly perfect. While my personal life disintegrated, my professional life offered a glimmer of hope, a new beginning. Vertex Media was the rising star in digital marketing, known for their innovative campaigns and exponential growth. They were also directly competing with McKinsey Creative Solutions, the family business of Rachel McKenzie, my husband's pregnant secretary and soon-to-be wife. "You should take it," my sister Eliza said when I called her that night, my voice hoarse from crying. "Get as far away from James and his pregnant mistress as possible. Start fresh." Eliza had never been James's biggest fan, always claiming he had an inflated sense of his own importance. "He thinks he's God's gift to marketing," she'd say with an eye roll. I had defended him countless times, believing her judgment was colored by her own failed marriage. Now, I wondered if she had seen something in him that I had been too in love to notice. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick. James seemed eager to tie up loose ends and begin his new life with Rachel and their coming child. Each meeting, with lawyers, felt like another death. The death of our shared dreams, our inside jokes, our future plans. I signed the final papers on a rainy Tuesday, eerily similar to the day he had confessed his betrayal. As I watched him walk out of the attorney's office, I realized it might be the last time I ever saw him. 15 years reduced to signatures. On legal documents and a hollow ache in my chest. Catherine Marshall? The receptionist's voice pulled me from my thoughts as I sat in the waiting area of Vertex Media's sleek downtown office 2 weeks later. Mr. Donovan will see you now. I smoothed down my carefully chosen navy suit, professional but with just enough edge to show I understood the creative culture, and followed her through a maze of open workspaces filled with young professionals, typing furiously on their keyboards or engaged in animated discussions around whiteboards covered in colorful diagrams. Victor Donovan, CEO of Vertex Media, was not what I had expected. In his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wearing jeans with a blazer, he exuded a casual confidence that immediately put me at ease. Catherine, pleasure to finally meet in person. Your portfolio impressed everyone on the team. His handshake was firm, his smile genuine. This was a man who had built his company from nothing, turning it into a formidable competitor in just under a decade. I had researched him extensively. A former creative director who had grown tired of old-school marketing approaches and ventured out on his own. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Donovan. I've been following Vertex's growth. For years, I replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. The wall behind him was glass, offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. Somewhere out there was my old life, James and Rachel probably planning their wedding, while I sat here trying to build something new from the ashes. Call me Victor. Please. And I'm going to be honest with you, Catherine. I didn't just bring you in because of your impressive track record at Bennett & Associates. I brought you in because I know you understand our biggest competitor intimately. He leaned forward, his expression serious. McKinsey Creative Solutions has been losing market share for years, but they still hold on to some major clients through family connections. With your expertise in client relations and digital strategy, I believe you could help us finally overtake them completely. My heart skipped a beat. He knew. Somehow, Victor Donovan knew about my connection to the McKenzies, or at least to James, who would soon be part of their family business. For a moment, I considered denying any special knowledge, insisting that my interest was purely professional. But something in Victor's direct gaze told me that honesty would serve me better here. You've done your homework, I said, keeping my voice steady. Yes, my soon-to-be ex-husband is joining McKinsey Creative, but I want to be clear, I'm not interested in corporate espionage or revenge tactics. If that's what you're looking for, I'm not your candidate. I held his gaze, refusing to blink or look away. This was a test, for both of us. Victor's serious expression melted into a grin. Perfect answer. That's exactly why I want you on our team, Catherine. Integrity, even when it would be easy to take the low road. He sat back in his chair, nodding, appreciatively. Look, I don't care about your ex-husband or office gossip. What I care about is that you know how traditional marketing firms think, and you've got the skills to help us stay 10 steps ahead. Your digital campaign for Bennett's pharmaceutical client last year? Brilliant strategic thinking. That's what we need here. Relief washed over me. This wasn't about James or Rachel or their baby. This was about me, my skills, my potential, my future. For the first time since James's confession, I felt a spark of excitement. In that case, I said, returning his smile, when do I start? My first few months at Vertex Media passed in a blur of new faces, challenging projects, and late nights. The work was demanding but exhilarating, exactly what I needed to keep my mind occupied and my heart from dwelling on what I'd lost. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victor proved to be an exceptional mentor, pushing me to think beyond conventional strategies while providing the support I needed to succeed. My team was young, energetic, and terrifyingly brilliant, forcing me to stay on my toes and continuously evolve my approach. The divorce was finalized 3 months after I started at Vertex. I signed the last document on a Friday afternoon and went straight back to the office, burying myself in work until well past midnight. When I finally emerged from the building, the city was quiet, a light snow falling softly around the streetlights. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I should feel something more: grief, anger, liberation, but all I felt was exhaustion and a strange, hollow peace. It was over. 15 years of my life neatly wrapped up and filed away in a lawyer's office. That weekend, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not just for James or our marriage, but for the future I had imagined. The children we had talked about having someday. The retirement plans we had sketched out during lazy Sunday mornings. The growing old together that now would never be. I cried until there were no tears left, until my body ached and my eyes burned. And then, on Sunday evening, I took a long shower, made myself a proper meal for the first time in weeks, and opened my laptop to prepare for Monday's client presentation. Life continued. I threw myself into my work with a passion that surprised even me. Ideas that had been simmering in the back of my mind for years finally had space to flourish, unhindered by compromise or consideration for a partner's preferences. I cut my hair. The long waves James had loved were replaced with a sleek, shoulder-length style that felt like armor, like a declaration of change. I moved out of our suburban house into a downtown apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made me feel like I could conquer the world. "The phoenix rises," Victor commented with approval when I presented a particularly innovative strategy for a struggling tech client 6 months into my tenure. The campaign was a massive success, bringing in 3 more major clients and cementing my position as a valuable asset to Vertex. My team grew from 3 members to 8, then 15. My confidence grew with it, no longer tied to someone else's validation or approval. It was around this time that I first heard whispers about Mackenzie Creative's financial troubles. The marketing world was small, and news traveled fast. Apparently, they had lost several key clients in the past year, and rumors of internal conflicts were spreading. I deliberately avoided seeking more information, focusing instead on Vertex's continued growth and my own projects. If thoughts of James and Rachel occasionally crept in, wondering if they were happy, if their baby had been born, if James ever regretted his choice, I pushed them aside with ruthless efficiency. 1 year after joining Vertex, Victor called me into his office. The usual casual smile was replaced with an expression of serious consideration. "Catherine, how would you feel about heading up our new client acquisition department? You'd have complete control over strategy, team building, budget, everything." He pushed a folder across the desk toward me. This would mean a substantial promotion, of course, director level, with all the perks that entails. I stared at the folder, then back at Victor. "You're serious?" This was moving much faster than I had anticipated. Director positions usually went to people who had been with the company for years, not relative newcomers like me. Completely serious. "You've brought in more new business in 1 year than most people do in 5. Your campaigns consistently outperform projections, and your team would follow you into a burning building." He chuckled. "Though please don't test that theory. The insurance premiums would be a nightmare." I laughed, feeling a warm rush of pride and gratitude. This was more than just a promotion. It was validation that I had made the right choice in coming here, that my work stood on its own merit regardless of my personal setbacks. I'm honored, Victor, truly. "Before you accept," he said, his expression growing more serious, "there's something else you should know." He hesitated, which was unusual for him. Victor Donovan was not a man who minced words or sugar-coated difficult information. We're in talks to acquire a smaller agency. The deal isn't finalized yet, so this stays in this room. But I want you to be prepared, because you'll be overseeing the integration of their client roster and team members if you accept this position. A vague sense of unease crept up my spine. Which agency? Victor held my gaze steadily. Mackenzie Creative Solutions. The world seemed to tilt for a moment as the implications sank in. Mackenzie Creative, Rachel's family business, now James's, employer, the company he had left me for. If Vertex acquired them, that would mean they're struggling more than the industry realizes. Victor continued, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. Old-school tactics, failure to adapt to digital trends, and some questionable financial decisions have put them in a position where acquisition is their best option. Their client list still has value, and some of their team members could be assets with proper direction. He paused, studying my reaction. If this creates a conflict for you, I understand. We can restructure the plan. I took a deep breath, forcing my racing thoughts into order. This wasn't about James or Rachel or our history. This was business, an opportunity to prove myself, to lead in a challenging situation, to demonstrate that I had moved beyond personal grievances to professional excellence. And wasn't that exactly what I had been working toward for the past year? No conflict, I said firmly, meeting Victor's gaze with newfound resolve. When do we start the integration planning? Victor's expression softened with something like admiration. That's why you're perfect for this role, Catherine. Most people would let personal history cloud their judgment, but you see the bigger picture. He stood, extending his hand. Congratulations, Director Marshall. The acquisition team meets Monday morning at 9 a.m. sharp. As I walked back to my office, Victor's words echoed in my mind. Director Marshall. The title felt right, earned through my own merit and hard work. If fate had a sense of irony, placing me in a position where I might soon become James and Rachel's boss, well, that was just an unexpected twist in a story that had already taken so many turns. That evening, as I stood in my apartment watching the city lights come alive below me, I allowed myself to imagine the look on James's face when he realized what was happening. Would he be shocked? Horrified? Would he finally recognize the strength he had underestimated when he walked away? For the first time since our separation, I found myself looking forward to seeing him again. Not out of lingering affection or a desire for reconciliation, but because I wanted him to see who I had become without him. Director Catherine Marshall, of Vertex Media, no longer just James's wife or James's ex. I had remade myself from the ashes of his betrayal, and if our paths were about to cross again, he would be meeting a woman he had never truly known, a woman who no longer needed his approval or affection to define her worth. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had left me for a promise of advancement through Rachel's family connections, only to find himself potentially reporting to the woman he had discarded. Life had a way of coming full circle in the most unexpected ways. As I raised my wine glass to the glittering skyline, I made a silent promise to myself. When the time came to face James and Rachel again, I would do so with professionalism, dignity, and the quiet confidence of someone who had not just survived betrayal, but thrived in its aftermath. Little did I know that Monday morning would arrive with a twist that even I couldn't have anticipated, one that would test every ounce of my newfound strength and resolve. Monday morning arrived with unexpected clarity. The storm that had threatened all weekend had passed, leaving behind a crisp blue sky and sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Vertex Media's conference room. I arrived 30 minutes early, reviewing the acquisition, documents one last time and arranging my notes in perfect order. If I was going to lead this integration, I would do it flawlessly. Personal history be damned. Director Marshall. Victor's voice carried an unusual formality as he entered the room. followed by 3 executives I recognized from Vertex's legal and finance departments. Ready for this? I nodded, straightening my shoulders. Absolutely. Good. Because I just got word that Mackenzie's negotiation team will be here in 15 minutes. They pushed for an earlier meeting. Victor's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the subtle furrow in his brow. Apparently, they want to discuss some concerns before we move forward. Concerns? I raised an eyebrow. Their business is hemorrhaging clients. They're hardly in a position to have concerns. Victor shrugged. Family businesses can be emotional. Old man Mackenzie built that company from nothing. It can't be easy watching it get absorbed by a competitor. He studied me for a moment. Are you sure you're ready for this? It's not too late to recuse yourself. I met his gaze steadily. I'm here to do my job, Victor. Nothing more, nothing less. At precisely 9 a.m., our receptionist's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Donovan, the Mackenzie team has arrived. Send them in, Victor replied, then gave me a reassuring nod. I had prepared myself for many possibilities, seeing James again after all this time, facing Rachel with her family connections, navigating the complex emotions that might arise. What I hadn't prepared for was the sight that greeted me as the Mackenzie team filed into the conference room. First came an older man, clearly Edward Mackenzie himself, Rachel's father and the company founder. His silver hair and tailored suit couldn't disguise the defeated slump of his shoulders. Behind him followed a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who I recognized as their head of operations from my research. And then, walking with the confident stride of someone who believed himself indispensable, came James. Our eyes met across the conference table. For a split second, I saw shock register on his face. His step faltered, his expression froze. Then, just as quickly, a mask of professional indifference slipped into place. If I hadn't spent 15 years reading his every micro-expression, I might have missed it entirely. But there was no sign of Rachel. Curious, I had assumed she would be here, given her family's stake in the business. I made a mental note of her absence as Victor made introductions. Edward, Diane, James, welcome to Vertex. I'm Victor Donovan, CEO. He gestured toward me. And this is Catherine Marshall, our Director of Client Acquisition and Integration. She'll be overseeing the transition of your accounts and team members once the acquisition is finalized. Edward Mackenzie's gaze lingered on me, his eyes narrowing, slightly. Marshall. That name sounds familiar. He glanced at James, whose jaw had tightened visibly. Any relation to you, James? The room fell silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in Victor's head as he processed this unexpected connection. To his credit, he didn't so much as blink, his expression remaining perfectly neutral. Before James could respond, I stepped forward, extending my hand to Edward. Mr. Mackenzie, I believe the connection you're referring to is that I was previously married to James. But I assure you, this acquisition is purely business. My team and I are committed to ensuring a smooth transition for your clients and staff. Edward's eyebrows shot up. He took my hand automatically, but his expression was one of pure confusion. Previously married? But I thought... He stopped abruptly, looking at James. James cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on the business at hand, he said, his voice carrying that familiar controlled tone he always used when trying to navigate away from uncomfortable subjects. We have several points to discuss before moving forward. Victor stepped in smoothly. Of course. Please, everyone have a seat. Coffee? As we settled around the conference table, I could feel James's gaze boring into me. I refused to look his way, focusing instead on the documents before me and maintaining a posture of perfect professionalism. Inside, however, my mind was racing. What had Edward meant? Why was he surprised to hear James and I were previously married? And where was Rachel? The meeting proceeded with surprising efficiency. Edward Mackenzie, despite his initial discomfort, proved to be a pragmatic businessman. He had accepted that his company couldn't continue independently and seemed determined to secure the best possible terms for his remaining employees. Most of their requests were reasonable: retention bonuses for key staff, continuation of certain benefits, assistance with relocating to Vertex's offices. Throughout the discussions, James remained unusually quiet, speaking only when directly addressed. This was not the confident, assertive man I had been married to. Something had changed. When he did speak, outlining the status of major client relationships, his voice had lost that smug undertone I remembered from our last interactions. He seemed subdued, almost defeated. "We'll need a complete audit of all active accounts," I said, addressing the room but looking directly at James for the first time. "Client histories, contract terms, key contacts, ongoing campaigns, everything. My team will need full access starting next week." James nodded stiffly. "I can arrange that. Most of our account documentation is digital, but there are some legacy clients with paper files. I'll make sure everything is organized." "Thank you," I replied coolly. "I'd also like to schedule individual meetings with each account manager to discuss transition strategies. Would you be able to coordinate those as well?" Another nod. "Of course, whatever you need." His tone was professional, but there was something else there. Something that sounded almost like resignation. The meeting wrapped up an hour later, with agreements in principle on most major points. As everyone stood to leave, Victor pulled Edward aside for a private word, leaving me momentarily alone with James and Diane. Diane, seemingly sensing the tension, quickly excused herself. "I'll just wait outside with Edward. James, I'll see you at the office." With a polite nod in my direction, she hurried out, pulling the conference room door closed behind her. For the first time in over a year, James and I were alone together. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words and shared history. I busied myself gathering my notes, determined not to be the first to speak. "Catherine?" His voice was softer than I expected, almost hesitant. "You look well." I looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Thank you. I am well." "Director of Client Acquisition," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Impressive, but not surprising. You were always brilliant." "Was I?" I replied, arching an eyebrow. "Strange that you didn't remember that when you walked out on our marriage." He flinched visibly. "I deserve that." "You deserve a lot of things, James. But right now, what you deserve is irrelevant. We have a business transition to manage, and that's exactly what we're going to do, professionally and efficiently." He nodded slowly. "Of course, just business." He paused, running a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered all too well. "There are things you should know, though, about the situation at Mackenzie. If they're relevant to the acquisition, you can include them in your reports." I tucked my portfolio under my arm, ready to end this conversation. "They're relevant to us, Catherine." His voice dropped lower. "Rachel isn't with the company anymore. She left 6 months ago, taking her shares with her. That's partly why Mackenzie is in this position now." I froze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Rachel and I—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "It's complicated, and not something we should discuss here. Could we maybe get coffee sometime? Talk properly?" Anger flared hot and sudden in my chest. "Talk properly? After everything you did? You left me for her, James. You threw away 15 years of marriage for a pregnancy and a job promotion, and now you want to chat over coffee?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Absolutely not." His face fell. "I understand. But, Catherine, there are things you don't know. Things I need to explain." "The time for explanations was a year ago," I replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." I brushed past him, determined to escape before he could. See how much this encounter had affected me. Just before I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "She lost the baby," he said quietly. 3 months in. Edward doesn't know we're separated. Nobody at Mackenzie does. Rachel made me promise to keep up appearances until she could figure things out. I turned slowly, studying his face for any sign of deception. Finding none, I asked the one question I couldn't stop myself from voicing. "And did she figure things out?" "In a way," James replied, his expression unreadable. "She moved to London with her new boyfriend, a client she met through the agency." I stood there, processing this information, trying to reconcile it with the narrative I'd constructed over the past year. James had left me for Rachel, who was pregnant with his child, but now there was no baby, and apparently no Rachel either. Yet he had stayed at Mackenzie, maintaining the fiction of their relationship. None of it made sense. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed both helpless and resigned. "Because you deserve the truth. And because in a week, you're going to be my boss." His mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it? Before I could respond, the conference room door opened, and Victor stepped back in. "Catherine, do you have a moment? I'd like to go over some details. Before our next meeting." "Of course," I replied, grateful for the interruption. To James, I merely nodded. "I'll see you next week. Please have those account files ready." As I followed Victor down the hallway, my mind was spinning. James and Rachel had separated. There was no baby. She had left him for someone else, just as he had left me for her. The perfect karmic retribution. So why didn't I feel more satisfied, you guy? "Okay?" Victor asked quietly once we were back in his office. That couldn't have been easy. I sank into the chair across from his desk. "Did you know? About James and me?" Victor's expression was apologetic. "I knew he was your ex-husband, yes. What I didn't know was that Edward Mackenzie apparently wasn't aware of your connection." He leaned forward. "Catherine, if this is too complicated—" "It's not," I interrupted firmly. "I can handle it." "I'm sure you can," he replied. "But should you have to? It's one thing to acquire a competitor. It's another to directly manage your ex-husband after what he did to you." I took a deep breath. "Victor, when you offered me this position, you did it because you believed I was the best person for the job. Has that changed in the last 2 hours?" He shook his head. "Not at all, but—" "Then I'm doing it," I said with finality. "James made his choices, and now he'll have to live with the consequences, including reporting to me." Victor studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. But promise me one thing. If it becomes too personal, if it starts affecting your work or your well-being, you'll tell me." "I promise," I agreed, knowing even as I said it, that my definition of too personal might differ significantly from his. "Now, what details did you want to discuss?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and emails. I deliberately kept myself busy, refusing to dwell on my encounter with James or the revelations he had shared. When I finally returned to my apartment that evening, exhaustion had overtaken shock, leaving me strangely numb. I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of wine, standing before the wall of windows that had become my favorite thinking spot. The city stretched out below, lights twinkling against the gathering dusk. Somewhere out there was James, dealing with his own complicated feelings about our reunion. Rachel was gone. The baby, the reason he had left me, the justification for destroying our marriage, had never even been born. And now James was facing the collapse of the very company he had sacrificed everything to join. There was a certain poetic justice to it all. Yet instead of satisfaction, I felt only a hollow sadness. Not for the loss of our marriage. I had mourned. Is that already? But for the waste of it all. The pointless pain, The years thrown away, the trust broken irreparably. For what? A pregnancy that ended, a relationship that failed, a career opportunity that turned to dust. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Catherine, it's James. I got your number from the contact sheet Victor distributed. I know you don't want to talk, but there's more you should know. Not just about Rachel and me, but about Mackenzie's accounts. Things that might affect the acquisition. Please reconsider that coffee. I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. Professional curiosity warred with personal boundaries. If there were issues with Mackenzie's accounts that could impact the acquisition, I needed to know about them. But meeting James outside of work, allowing him back into my personal space even momentarily, that felt like a dangerous step. Another text arrived before I could decide. I understand if you say no. I'll have a full report on your desk by Friday either way. But Catherine, I owe you an explanation, even if it changes nothing between us. My finger hovered over the keyboard. One simple response could close this chapter permanently. No. Keep all communication professional. 4 years ago, I wouldn't have hesitated, but I wasn't that person anymore. The Catherine who had sat frozen while her husband announced he was leaving wasn't the same Catherine who now stood as director at Vertex Media. That woman had been defined by her marriage, had measured her worth through James's eyes. This woman, the one I had become, measured herself by her own standards. And that woman was strong enough to face whatever James had to say. I typed a quick reply before I could second-guess myself. Parker's Coffee Shop. 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. 30 minutes. Only. This is a professional courtesy, not a reconciliation. His response came immediately. Thank you. I'll be there. Setting down my phone, I turned back to the window. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet pride. 1 year ago, seeing James again would have shattered me. Now, it was just another obstacle to navigate on my path forward. Whatever James had to say, whatever complications awaited in Mackenzie's accounts, I would face them with the confidence I had built from the ashes of his betrayal. Because in the end, his leaving had given me something unexpected, the chance to discover who Catherine Marshall really was when she stood entirely on her own. And that woman was not someone to be underestimated, least of all by the man who had once discarded her. Parker's Coffee Shop buzzed with the early morning crowd, bleary-eyed commuters clutching to-go cups, students hunched over laptops, and business people trying to squeeze in meetings before the workday officially began. I chose a table in the far corner, strategically positioned to see the entrance while offering some privacy from neighboring tables. At precisely 7:28 a.m., James walked through the door. He spotted me immediately, his face registering a mix of relief and apprehension. As he made his way toward me, I took a moment to study him objectively, something I hadn't allowed myself to do during yesterday's meeting. He looked thinner than I remembered, the once perfect tailoring of his suit, now slightly loose around the shoulders. His eyes carried the shadowed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well, and his hair had more gray at the temples than when I'd last seen him. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from me. The familiar scent of his cologne, the same one he'd worn throughout our marriage, drifted across the table, triggering an unexpected wave of memories. I tapped my watch. 29 minutes left. I suggest you don't waste time with pleasantries. He nodded, accepting this boundary. I'll get straight to it then. He pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table between us. These are copies of some of Mackenzie's financial records from the past 8 months. Records that weren't included in the acquisition paperwork. My guard immediately went up. If you're withholding information from Vertex's due diligence team, that's a serious breach of— I'm not withholding anything, he interrupted. Edward is. And Rachel, before she left. He pushed the folder toward me. Catherine, Mackenzie. is in worse shape than even Victor realizes. These accounts show a pattern of creative accounting that goes back almost 2 years. I didn't touch the folder. You're accusing your future father-in-law, former future father-in-law, of financial fraud? And you expect me to believe you had no part in it? James ran, a hand through his hair, that familiar nervous gesture again. I discovered it 4 months ago when I took over as acting CFO after Rachel's departure. Edward had been hiding losses, double-counting revenues, even creating fake clients to inflate the company's valuation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. The company isn't just struggling, Catherine. It's functionally insolvent. The only real value left is in the client relationships. I finally reached for the folder, my professional curiosity overriding my personal reluctance. Flipping through the pages, I saw what James was talking about. The discrepancies were subtle but significant. Enough to dramatically alter how Vertex would value the acquisition. Why are you showing me this? I asked, looking up from the documents. Why not go directly to Victor? Because I wanted to give you the chance to be the one to bring this to light, he replied, his expression earnest. You deserve this win. Catherine, the acquisition is still worth doing. Mackenzie's client list alone justifies it, but the terms need to be completely renegotiated. I studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or deception. Finding none, I asked the question that had been bothering me since yesterday. What happened with Rachel, James? The real story. He sighed deeply, a sound laden with regret. After she lost the baby, everything changed. She became distant, angry. I realized she had never actually wanted a relationship with me. I was just a convenient solution when she found herself pregnant. His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. The great irony is that I only learned later that the timing didn't add up. The baby couldn't have been mine. I felt as if someone had dumped ice water over me. What? The dates didn't work, he said simply. I was in Chicago at that conference for 10 days when she would have conceived. She was seeing someone else before me, a client. When she found out she was pregnant, she needed a scapegoat who could be controlled, someone who would have a reason to stay quiet and play along with her family's expectations. And you were the perfect patsy, I finished for him, unable to keep the edge from my voice. So eager for advancement that you'd throw away your marriage for a promotion and a woman who was using you. He flinched, but didn't deny it. I deserve that, and worse. I made the worst mistake of my life, Catherine, and I've been paying for it ever since. He glanced down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly between his hands. Rachel threatened to tell her father everything if I exposed her. Edward would have fired me immediately, ruined my reputation in the industry. I was trapped. And now? Why risk telling me all this? Because the acquisition changes everything. Rachel's gone, and Edward's about to lose control of the company. Anyway. And because... He hesitated, then met my eyes directly. Because you deserve the truth, even if it's too late for us. I sat back, trying to process everything. Part of me wanted to believe this was some elaborate manipulation, James trying to salvage his wounded pride or position himself favorably in the new corporate structure. But the documentation in front of me was real, and his story explained too many inconsistencies to be a complete fabrication. I need to verify this information, I said, gathering the papers and tucking them into my own portfolio. If it checks out, I'll bring it to Victor myself. Of course, James nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less. I glanced at my watch. Our 30 minutes are almost up. Is there anything else I need to know before I take this to Victor? James hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Just one thing. I found this while cleaning out my desk at Mackenzie. He placed the box on the table and slid it toward me. With a sense of foreboding, I opened it. Inside lay my grandmother's sapphire earrings. A family heirloom I had reported lost during our move to the suburbs 3 years ago. I had torn the house apart looking for them, devastated at the thought of losing the last gift my grandmother had given me before she died. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at him in confusion. "These disappeared years ago. How did they end up in your desk?" "Rachel took them," James said quietly, "from our house during that dinner party we hosted for the Mackenzie executive team. She was wearing them at the company Christmas party 7 months ago. When I recognized them, she claimed you had given them to her as a peace offering. I knew that was impossible." He paused. "I confronted her, and that's when everything started falling apart between us. I took them back that night, but by then, you and I were already divorced." I stared at the earrings, a strange mix of emotions churning inside me. Relief at having them back, anger at their theft, confusion at what this meant about the larger picture of my marriage's end. "Thank you for returning them," I said finally, my voice carefully neutral as I closed the box and tucked it away. James nodded. "I should have done it sooner. I should have done a lot of things sooner." He pushed back his chair and stood. "I won't take any more of your time. Whatever happens with the acquisition, with Mackenzie, with my position, I accept it. You don't owe me anything, Catherine." As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. "James?" He paused, looking back at me with a question in his eyes. "Why did you really leave? Was it just ambition? Just her?" For a moment, he didn't answer, his expression a complex mixture of regret and resignation. "I thought I wanted what Rachel was offering: status, connections, easy advancement. But the truth?" He shook his head slowly. "I think I was afraid of what we had built together, of being the man you deserved. And then I spent a year learning exactly how much I had thrown away." With that, he turned and walked out of the coffee shop, disappearing into the morning crowd. I sat there long after he'd gone, trying to make sense of everything. The financial documents, the stolen earrings, the revelation about Rachel's deception. It was almost too much to process. But I had a job to do, responsibilities that couldn't wait for my personal life to settle. Gathering my things, I headed for Vertex's offices, my mind already formulating how to approach Victor with this new information. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Victor asked, leaning back in his chair. He had listened in silence as I presented the documents James had given me, his expression growing increasingly grave. "I had our finance team verify the numbers this morning," I confirmed. "It's all accurate. Mackenzie has been cooking the books for at least 18 months. The company's actual value is roughly 40% of what they've been claiming," Victor C. let out a low whistle. "And James Wilson just handed this information to you? Why now, not earlier in the negotiations?" I chose my words carefully. James's position at Mackenzie has been complicated, but he's providing this information now because he believes the acquisition is still valuable for Vertex, just not at the price we've been discussing. "And you trust his motives?" A fair question. Did I trust James? After everything, could I? "I trust the numbers," I replied, "and I trust that he wants to be on the winning side of this deal. Mackenzie is sinking. His only viable professional future is with Vertex, and he knows." Victor nodded slowly. "All right, I'll have legal draft a completely revised offer based on this information." He fixed me with a penetrating look. "Are you still comfortable leading the integration, given everything?" "More comfortable now than before," I said honestly. I needed to understand what I was walking into. Now I do. Good. Victor stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "Because I'd like you to present the revised offer to Mackenzie personally, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Edward deserves to know exactly why we're slashing our valuation." I raised an eyebrow. "You're sending me to be the bearer of bad news?" Victor's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I'm sending my director of client acquisition to demonstrate that Vertex understands the true value of what we're acquiring. Edward Mackenzie has been playing games, Catherine. It's time someone called his bluff. The atmosphere in Mackenzie Creative's conference room the next day was tense enough to slice with a knife. Edward Mackenzie sat at the head of the table, his face flushed with a combination of anger and embarrassment. Diane from operations looked shell-shocked. James sat quietly to one side, his expression carefully neutral, though I noticed he wouldn't meet Edward's eyes. "This is outrageous," Edward sputtered, jabbing a finger at the revised offer I had just presented. "You're proposing to pay less than half what we agreed to last week. Based on what? Unsubstantiated claims about our financials?" I remained calm, meeting his gaze steadily. "Mr. Mackenzie, I have copies of your actual financial records for the past 18 months, showing systematic misrepresentation of revenue, clients, and growth projections. Would you like me to go through them line by line?" Edward's face paled. His eyes darted to James, then back to me. "Who gave you those? Who would dare?" "That's irrelevant," I cut him off. "What matters is that Vertex is still interested in acquiring Mackenzie Creative, but at a price that reflects its actual value. The terms in this proposal are fair, given the circumstances." Edward slammed his fist on the table. "This is a hostile takeover. I won't stand for it." "It's not a takeover at all, hostile or otherwise," I replied, keeping my voice level. "It's a lifeboat, Mr. Mackenzie. Your company is 6 months from bankruptcy. Your daughter has already jumped ship with her shares. Your remaining clients are getting restless. Vertex is offering you and your employees a chance to survive." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But we won't pay a premium for fiscal fiction." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward seemed to deflate before our eyes, the fight draining out of him as the truth of his situation became inescapable. Diane looked down at her hands, avoiding everyone's gaze. Only James seemed unsurprised, watching the scene unfold with the resigned expression of someone witnessing an inevitable conclusion. "We need time to consider this new offer," Edward finally said, his voice noticeably subdued. I gathered my papers and stood. "You have until Monday, 5 p.m. After that, Vertex will pursue other acquisition targets." It was a bluff. Victor had no intention of walking away from Mackenzie's client list, but Edward didn't need to know that. As I turned to leave, Edward called after me. "Ms. Marshall, a moment in private, please." I glanced at James, who gave me an almost imperceptible nod, then followed Edward into his private office adjacent to the conference room. Once the door closed behind us, Edward's professional facade crumbled. "You were married to James," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I confirmed. "We divorced last year." Edward sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. "When Rachel brought him home, she told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had left him for another man. That's the story she gave the entire family." He shook his head in disbelief. "I'm beginning to wonder if anything my daughter ever told me was true." I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy for the man. Whatever his business ethics might be, he was also a father who had been deceived by his child. "Mr. Mackenzie, my history with James has no bearing on Vertex's offer. This is strictly business." He gave a bitter laugh. "Is it? Or is this your revenge? Breaking up my company, exposing my financial strategies, taking everything I've built?" "This isn't revenge," I said firmly. "If it were, I wouldn't be offering you a path forward at all. Vertex values what Mackenzie has built, your client relationships, your creative history, your team's expertise. We just aren't willing to overpay based on manipulated numbers." Edward studied me for a long moment, then seemed to reach some internal conclusion. "You know, when Rachel first started working with James, I thought she was making a mistake. He seemed too conventional, too straightforward for this business." He shook his head. Turns out he was the only honest one in the room, and I was too blind to see it. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I simply waited. "We'll take the deal," Edward said finally. "On one condition. I walk away completely. No transition period, no consulting role. I'll sign whatever non-compete you require, but I'm done." He looked up at me, his eyes hollow. "I built this company for Rachel. If she doesn't want it, neither do I." "I'll discuss it with Victor," I replied. "I'm sure we can accommodate your request." As I turned to leave, Edward added quietly, "Ms. Marshall, Catherine. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about what happened with you and James. My daughter has always been manipulative, even as a child. I indulged it too much, I suppose. Mr. Mackenzie, with all due respect, James made his own choices. No one forced him to leave his marriage." I paused at the door. "But thank you for the sentiment." Walking back through the Mackenzie offices, I was struck by how quickly everything was changing. In just a few weeks, these spaces would be emptied, the employees either integrated into Vertex or let go, the Mackenzie name reduced to a line item in Vertex's acquisition history. The company James had sacrificed our marriage for would cease to exist as an independent entity. There was indeed a certain poetic justice to it all. James was waiting by the elevator, clearly having anticipated my exit. How did it go with Edward? "He's taking the deal," I said, pressing the call button. "He wants to walk away completely. No transition period." James nodded. I expected as much. Pride was always his defining characteristic. Too proud to admit failure? Too proud to accept help? He hesitated. "What happens now? With the integration team?" The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, then held the door open, studying him. "That depends on you, James. Vertex needs people who understand Mackenzie's clients, who can ensure a smooth transition. But we also need people we can trust." I met his eyes directly. "Can I trust you?" It was the most personal question I had asked him since our divorce, and we both knew I wasn't just talking about business. "Yes," he said simply. "You can trust me to do my job, and to respect the boundaries you set. Nothing more, nothing less." I nodded, releasing the elevator door. "Good. Then I'll see you Monday morning at Vertex. 8 a.m. sharp. We have a lot of work to do." As the doors closed between us, I caught a glimpse of James's expression. Relief, resignation, and something else I couldn't quite name. Perhaps regret. Perhaps acceptance. Perhaps both. Returning to my office at Vertex, I found a small package waiting on my desk. Inside was a handwritten note. "Catherine, I thought you might want these back as well. They're from our first anniversary." I couldn't bring myself to sell them, even when things were at their worst. Beneath the note lay my pearl earrings, the ones James had given me after our first year of marriage. I had left them behind during the divorce, too painful a reminder of happier times. Now, holding them alongside my grandmother's sapphires, I felt an odd sense of completion, as if scattered pieces of my past were slowly being gathered up and returned to me, not to rebuild what had been lost, but to acknowledge that it had existed. That it had mattered, regardless of how it ended. Tucking both sets of earrings into my desk drawer, I turned my attention to the work ahead. The Mackenzie acquisition would be challenging, complex, and potentially fraught with personal landmines. But for the first time since James had walked out of our marriage, I felt fully equipped to face whatever came next. Not as his ex-wife, not as Rachel's replacement, but as Catherine Marshall, Director of Client Acquisition at Vertex Media. Woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, stronger than before. 3 months after finalizing the Mackenzie acquisition, Vertex Media hosted a celebration gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel. The integration had been smoother than expected. Most of Mackenzie's key talent had made the transition successfully. Client retention was at 92%, and our combined market share had jumped 12 points. By any measure, the acquisition was a resounding success, worthy of the champagne that flowed freely as executives, clients, and team members mingled beneath crystal chandeliers. To Catherine Marshall, Victor raised his glass in a toast, his voice carrying across the ballroom. Who transformed what could have been a contentious takeover into a seamless merger of talent and vision? The architect of our most successful acquisition to date. Applause erupted around me as I smiled and nodded in acknowledgement, uncomfortable as always with public recognition. From across the room, I caught James's eye. He raised his glass slightly in my direction, a private salute separate from the public accolades. In the months since the acquisition, we had established a cautious professional rapport. He had proven himself valuable during the transition, working tirelessly to smooth client concerns and integrate the disparate teams. True to his word, he had respected my boundaries, keeping our interactions strictly professional. Ms. Marshall? A voice at my elbow pulled my attention away. I turned to find a striking woman in her early 40s, elegantly dressed in a midnight blue gown. Vivian Chen, Luminous Tech. I wanted to congratulate you personally on the acquisition. Quite an accomplishment. I shook her offered hand. Thank you, Ms. Chen. Luminous has been on our radar for some time. I'm hoping we might discuss potential collaboration now that the Mackenzie integration is complete. That's precisely why I wanted to meet you, she smiled. And please, call me Vivian. Catherine, I replied, warming to her direct approach. Our conversation flowed easily, covering everything from emerging market trends to the challenges of women in leadership positions. Vivian had founded Luminous Tech after leaving a major Silicon Valley firm, building it into one of the most innovative tech marketing consultancies in the industry. She was sharp, insightful, and refreshingly straightforward, qualities I had always respected. You know, she said after a while, her tone becoming more personal, I followed the Mackenzie acquisition with particular interest. I almost married Edward Mackenzie's son from his first marriage years ago. I nearly choked on my champagne. Really? I didn't even know Edward had a son. Few people do. Thomas keeps a low profile, chose a completely different career path. But the family dynamics? She shook her head. Let's just say I dodged a bullet. When I heard about Rachel's situation, I wasn't entirely surprised. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about my own connection to the Mackenzie family drama. You know about Rachel? Vivian's expression turned knowing. The industry gossips, Catherine. I heard she's in London now, with some pharmaceutical executive she met through the agency. And I heard her father had no idea she'd left until the acquisition was nearly complete. She paused, studying me. Just as I've heard rumors about your own history with James Wilson. I kept my expression neutral. Gossip is rarely accurate. True, she conceded. But in this case, I admire how you've handled it. Taking the high road professionally while navigating what must be complicated personal history. Her eyes drifted past me, and I followed her gaze to where James stood talking with a group of clients. He seems to have realized what he lost. A bit late, perhaps, but still. Before I could respond, Victor appeared at my side. Catherine, I hate to interrupt, but the Westbrook team is asking for you. Something about their new campaign launch. I excused myself from Vivian with a promise to connect later about potential collaborations. As I made my way across the ballroom, I found myself reflecting on her words. He seems to have realized what he lost. Was that true? And more importantly, did it matter to me anymore? The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of client conversations and team celebrations. It was nearly midnight when I finally escaped to the terrace for a moment of quiet. The spring air was cool but pleasant, the city skyline twinkling against the night. I leaned against the stone balustrade, letting the tension of maintaining my public persona ease from my shoulders. Quite a triumph, isn't it? I didn't need to turn to know it was James. After 15 years together, I could recognize his footsteps, the cadence of his breathing. It was a team effort, I replied, not looking at him as he came to stand beside me. Everyone pulled together to make it work. You're being modest. This was your vision, your execution. He paused. I've worked for 6 different directors in my career, Catherine. None of them could have managed this transition as skillfully as you did. I finally turned to face him. Is that a professional assessment, or are you trying to flatter your boss? A small smile touched his lips. Can it be both? Despite myself, I laughed. It felt strange, laughing with James after everything, but not entirely unpleasant. I suppose it can. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out at the city below. There was a time when such silence between us was comfortable, intimate even. Now it held the weight of all that had happened, all that had been lost. I got an offer from Vertex Media, James said finally. Senior marketing director for their international division, based in their London office. I felt a strange lurch in my chest. London? He nodded. They approached me last week. The salary is substantial, the opportunity significant. He hesitated. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before I make my decision. I see. I kept my voice neutral, processing this unexpected development. When would you start? Next month, if I accept. He turned to face me fully. Catherine, I need to know. Would my leaving create problems for the integration? Is there unfinished work that would make my departure difficult for Vertex? This was the James I remembered from our early years. Considerate, thoughtful about how his actions affected others. Not the man who had walked out on our marriage with barely a backward glance. The critical integration phase is complete, I said honestly. Your team is well established, your clients stable. From a business perspective, your departure would be manageable. I paused. Is that what you wanted to know? Partly, he admitted. I also wanted to know if... He trailed off, seemingly struggling with what to say next. If what, James? If my leaving would matter to you, he finished quietly. Not as my boss, but as... you. The question hung between us, fraught with unspoken meaning. 6 months ago, I might have dismissed it outright, too angry and hurt to consider anything beyond our professional connection. But now, after working closely together through the acquisition, after learning the full truth about Rachel's deception, after seeing how James had tried to make amends in 1,000 small ways, now I wasn't so certain. I don't know, I answered truthfully. A year ago, I would have celebrated your departure to another continent. 6 months ago, I would have been indifferent. Now, I shook my head. I honestly don't know. He nodded, accepting this ambiguous answer. That's fair. He glanced down at his watch. It's getting late. I should let you get back to the party. You have admirers waiting. He gestured toward the ballroom, where Victor was scanning the crowd, clearly looking for me. As James turned to leave, I found myself reaching out, my fingers brushing his sleeve. James. He paused, looking back at me with a question in his eyes. Whatever you decide about London, I said carefully, I hope it brings you what you're looking for. A complex emotion crossed his face, part gratitude, part regret, part something I couldn't quite name. What I was looking for was always right in front of me, Catherine. I was just too blind to see it until it was gone. He gave me a sad smile. Good night. I watched him walk away, disappearing back into the glittering crowd inside. His words echoed in my mind, stirring emotions I had thought long buried. Was there still something between us, some ember of what we had once shared? Or was this simply the closure we both needed to truly move forward? The following Monday, I arrived at my office to find a sealed envelope on my desk. Inside was James's formal resignation, along with a handwritten note. Catherine, I've accepted the position in London. My last day at Vertex will be May 15th. I've already briefed my team and begun transition preparations. These past months working under your leadership have been a revelation. You've shown me what true professional excellence looks like, something I once thought I understood but clearly didn't. Perhaps that's been the hardest lesson in all of this, recognizing how much I failed to appreciate when we were together. I won't burden you with regrets or apologies. Those wouldn't change anything. Instead, I'll simply say thank you for the second chance to know you, even if only as colleagues. It has been an honor. James, I read the note twice, my emotions surprisingly complex. Relief that our complicated professional relationship would soon end. Pride that he had recognized my professional worth. And underneath it all, a faint, bittersweet ache for what might have been, for the marriage we had once had, before ambition and poor choices had torn it apart. That evening, as I worked late finalizing the quarterly reports, my office phone rang. Catherine Marshall, I answered, expecting it to be Victor with questions about the numbers. Catherine, it's Vivian Chen. Her voice was warm but businesslike. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, I replied, surprised. What can I do for you? I've been thinking about our conversation at the gala. Vertex and Luminous could do some interesting work together. She paused. Would you be free for dinner this Friday to discuss potential collaboration? I found myself smiling. I'd like that. Excellent. How about Marcello's at 7? As I hung up, I realized I was genuinely looking forward to Friday. To a new professional connection, perhaps even a new friendship. In the year since James had left, I had rebuilt my career, rediscovered my confidence, and reclaimed my independence. Now, perhaps, it was time to rebuild other aspects of my life as well. James's departure for London wasn't an ending, but another beginning. For him, for me, for both of us to finally close the chapter we had shared and write new stories separately. The pain of his betrayal would always be part of my history, but it no longer defined me. What defined me now was what I had built from the ashes. A career I was proud of, a life that was fully mine, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to face whatever came next. The woman whose husband had left her for his secretary no longer existed. In her place stood Catherine Marshall, Director of Client Acquisition at Vertex Media. Someone who had not just survived betrayal, but had transformed it into triumph. And that was a story worth telling. 2 years after James left for London, I found myself on a business trip to New York, representing Vertex at the International Marketing Summit. The conference was being held at the prestigious Harrington Hotel, bringing together industry leaders from around the world. As the newly appointed Executive Vice President of Client Strategy at Vertex, a promotion I had received 6 months earlier, my schedule was packed with panel discussions, networking events, and potential client meetings. Catherine Marshall? A voice called from across the hotel lobby as I checked in. I turned to see Lawrence Westbrook, CEO of Vertex Media, approaching with his characteristic confident stride. I thought that was you. Welcome to New York. Lawrence, I smiled, extending my hand. Good to see you. I didn't realize you'd be attending. Last-minute decision, he replied, his British accent more pronounced than I remembered. Our London team has some exciting developments they wanted to showcase. He paused, regarding me with a knowing look. Including a rather impressive campaign headed by your former colleague. James has become quite the asset to our international division. I kept my expression neutral, though the mention of James's name still triggered a complex swirl of emotions I preferred not to examine too closely. I'm not surprised. James always had exceptional creative instincts. Lawrence nodded. Indeed. In fact, he's flying in tomorrow morning for the Innovation in Digital Marketing panel. You're on that panel as well, yes? I felt my pulse quicken. Slightly. I am. Excellent. Lawrence seemed genuinely pleased. Perhaps we could all have dinner afterward. I've been meaning to discuss potential collaboration between Vertex and Westbrook for some time. Before I could formulate a polite deflection, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Victor. I'm sorry, I need to take this. We'll catch up during the conference, I said, stepping away with a sense of relief at the timely interruption. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I found myself standing by the window, watching the glittering New York skyline and thinking about the prospect of seeing James again after 2 years. Our last interaction had been cordial but laden with unspoken regrets. His resignation, the brief goodbye in my office, the professional handshake that couldn't begin to encapsulate our complicated history. Since then, I had thrown myself into expanding Vertex's client base, developing innovative strategies that had earned industry recognition, and building a personal life that no longer revolved around the ghost of a failed marriage. My dinner with Vivian Chen had evolved into a genuine friendship and a productive business partnership, with Luminous Tech now one of Vertex's most valued collaborators. I had even begun dating again, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, though nothing had developed into anything serious. I had moved on. Or at least I thought I had. The next morning, I was reviewing my presentation notes over coffee in the hotel restaurant when a familiar figure appeared in my peripheral vision. I looked up, and there he was, James Wilson, looking more relaxed and confident than I remembered, dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that complemented his now fully silver temples. "Catherine," he said, his voice carrying that tone of surprised pleasure that couldn't be faked. Lawrence mentioned, "You were here, but I didn't expect to run into you before the panel." I gestured to the empty chair across from me. "Join me? Unless you're meeting someone." "No, I'm free." He settled into the chair, signaling a waiter for coffee. "You look well. The executive life clearly agrees with you." "Congratulations are in order for you, too," I replied. "I've heard about your success with Westbrook's Asian market expansion. Very impressive." A flicker of something, pride mixed with humility, crossed his face. "Thank you. It's been challenging, but rewarding." He paused as the waiter delivered his coffee. "Different too, living abroad. Forces you to see things from new perspectives." Our conversation flowed with surprising ease, focusing mainly on industry trends and conference expectations. Neither of us ventured into personal territory, maintaining the safe distance of former colleagues with shared professional interests. Yet beneath this cordial exchange ran an undercurrent of unspoken questions, of paths not taken and words never said. The Innovation and Digital Marketing panel proceeded smoothly, with James and I demonstrating a natural professional rapport that had the audience engaged and the moderator delighted. We complemented each other's points, built upon shared insights, and even exchanged the occasional knowing glance when another panelist made a particularly outdated assertion. Anyone watching who didn't know our history would have seen only two industry experts with mutual respect and compatible viewpoints. "You two work remarkably well together," Lawrence commented afterward, as the three of us headed toward the hotel restaurant for the dinner he had insisted upon. "Hard to believe you're at competing agencies." James caught my eye briefly before responding. "Catherine and I have always been able to find common ground professionally." Dinner with Lawrence proved to be focused primarily on business, his vision for potential collaboration between Vertex and Westbrook, particularly in emerging markets where both companies had established footholds. As the meal concluded, he excused himself for a call with London, leaving James and me momentarily alone. "He's laying the groundwork for a merger proposal," James said quietly, once Lawrence was out of earshot. "Westbrook has been positioning for it for months." I raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me this because—" "Professional courtesy," he replied simply. "You should be prepared when Victor brings it to the executive team. The terms will be generous, but it would fundamentally change Vertex's operating structure." I studied him, trying to discern his motives. "Why would you share insider information with a competitor?" His eyes met mine directly. "Because despite everything, I still respect you too much to let you walk into that blindsided. Before I could respond, Lawrence returned, and the moment passed. The rest of the evening maintained its professional veneer, with plans made for a follow-up meeting between our respective teams in the coming month. As we said our goodbyes in the hotel lobby, Lawrence extended an invitation to tour Westbrook's New York offices the following day. I have meetings scheduled all morning, I explained, but I could stop by in the afternoon. Perfect, Lawrence beamed. James can show you around. He'll be there until his flight back to London tomorrow evening. And so it was arranged, with a polite nod between James and me sealing the commitment. As I rode the elevator back to my room, I wondered if I was making a mistake, deliberately extending my time with a man who had once broken my heart so thoroughly. Yet something compelled me forward, curiosity perhaps, or the need for a more definitive closure than we had achieved 2 years ago. The next afternoon found me walking through Westbrook's sleek offices beside James, listening as he explained their creative process and team structure. The space was impressive, open and collaborative, with stunning views of Central Park and state-of-the-art technology integrated throughout. And this is where the magic happens, James said with a hint of pride as we entered a large strategy room with wall-to-wall digital displays. We can connect with teams across all our international offices for real-time collaboration. Impressive, I acknowledged, genuinely appreciative of the thoughtful design. Very different from Vertex's approach. Different, but not better, he replied. Just suited to Westbrook's specific needs. He hesitated, then added, Catherine, there's actually something I wanted to show you that's not on the official tour. He gestured toward a door at the far end of the hallway. Do you mind? Curious, I followed him into what turned out to be a small exhibition space showcasing Westbrook's award-winning campaigns. Along one wall hung framed advertisements and accolades from various international competitions. James led me to a display featuring a healthcare campaign that had garnered significant recognition the previous year. The Parker Clinic Wellness Initiative, I read from the plaque. Adaptive multi-channel campaign targeting underserved communities. Grand prize winner, London Advertising Awards. I looked at James questioningly. It's impressive work, but why specifically show me this? Because it was inspired by your approach to the Meridian Healthcare campaign at Bennett & Associates 7 years ago. His expression was earnest, almost vulnerable. The one you developed before we were married, when everyone said community-focused. Healthcare marketing couldn't generate meaningful engagement. I stared at him, genuinely surprised. You remembered that? I remembered everything, Catherine. His voice softened. Your insights, your strategies, your unwavering belief that marketing could actually make a difference in people's lives. When I was developing this campaign, I kept thinking, what would Catherine do? It became something of a mantra in our strategy sessions. I didn't know how to respond. This was unexpected. Not just that he had drawn inspiration from my early work, but that he had chosen to share this with me now in this semi-private moment, away from Lawrence and the official business at hand. I'm not telling you this to try to rekindle anything, he added quickly, seeming to sense my discomfort. I wanted you to know that even when I failed to appreciate you personally, I always respected your professional brilliance. That hasn't changed. If anything, it's only grown stronger since working under your leadership at Vertex. Thank you, I said finally, genuinely moved by his candor. That means a lot. We stood there in companionable silence, the weight of our shared history somehow lighter than it had been the day before. I realized then that I no longer carried anger toward James, not because what he had done wasn't wrong, but because I had outgrown the need to define myself in relation to that betrayal. The pain had dulled, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had built something meaningful from its ashes. I should probably get back to the hotel, I said eventually. Early flight tomorrow. James nodded. Of course. As we walked toward the elevators, he added, for what it's worth, Catherine, seeing you lead that panel yesterday, watching how far you've come, I'm genuinely happy for you. You deserve every success. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. As the elevator arrived and I stepped inside, I found myself saying something I never thought I would. James, if Westbrook and Vertex do end up moving forward with this merger talk, and if you're involved in the transition team, I paused, surprised by my own words. I think we could work together professionally. We've proven that much, at least. A complex emotion crossed his face. Relief, gratitude, perhaps even a hint of hope. I'd like that, he replied simply, as the elevator doors closed between us. I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me for years. Not forgiveness, exactly, but something equally powerful, the recognition that the past, with all its pain and disappointment, no longer held power over my present or my future. 2 days later, back in my office at Vertex, Victor called me in to discuss Westbrook's preliminary merger proposal, just as James had warned. As I listened to the terms, offering measured insights and raising appropriate concerns, I realized I was no longer the woman whose husband had left her for his secretary. I was Catherine Marshall, Executive Vice President of Client Strategy, evaluating a business opportunity with clear-eyed objectivity. Whatever the future held, whether collaboration with Westbrook or competition against them, whether occasional professional interaction with James or complete separation, I would face it on my own terms, defined not by what had been done to me, but by what I had chosen to become. And in that knowledge lay the truest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.